So, welcome again, everyone. This is Ramola D from Ramola D Reports. This is part two of my interview with Frédéric Laroche this evening on his court hearing today, and on the investigative reporter statement that was submitted at court that I will be making public shortly. So, thanks so much, Frédéric, for joining me and for continuing this conversation. I
Yes.
gather we both were bumped off air in part one. At least it looked to me like you were bumped off, but I was definitely bumped off. And
Yeah.
then by the time I came back and then I replayed a little bit, it looked like you had actually been retained online, but I
Yeah.
had vanished. Yeah. So anyway, and it's taken us a while to get back. So anyway, we are here and we are here to resume the conversation where we were. Now, you were talking about what had transpired at the court hearing today, and you were sort of wrapping up part one of that court hearing and coming to part two. So there were certain incidents that occurred in the courtroom that are of import. So go ahead and, take us through those.
Yeah, during this part two, it was all about my personality and it was all about the psychiatrist's way of seeing me. It was not a complete portrait of myself because if it was a question of my personality, it should have been told many different things positive about me, and it was only negative things. So it was based on the psychiatrist expert who saw me by the order of the prosecutor at the end of 2017. And I didn't want to go there, but it was an order. And the lady was expertising me based on what happened in the day of the incident with my explanation of the facts. And I have to say that my explanation of the facts is a mix of the facts themselves and also the thinking that I have about them, that it's maybe the result of my long lasting targeting and harassment. So I was explaining everything mixed together to the expert, and in her head it was impossible to understand that I was a victim. And so she concluded that I was schizophrenic. And then she also concluded that for this reason, I was a delusional person who can suddenly attack others because I was maybe afraid that I was a victim of perps action. So because I was doing like that, I was a dangerous person. So I wanted to submit another report from a psychologist that I saw in October 2018. And this psychologist made me do a test during 2 hours, the Rorschach test.
Rorschach
Yeah.
test.
And
Mhm.
then she concluded that I was not delusional, I was not paranoid, I was not schizophrenic, I was not psychotic, and I was among the people that we call the gifted. And I was someone with a nice personality, and I was not violent, I was not aggressive, and I was not dangerous. So it was all the contrary from the expert psychiatrist that was actually ordered by the prosecutor to.
Yes, and this is a very important test that you actually did and that you've indeed reported. So, and as you know, this is something that I definitely wanted to include in my statement as well, and did indeed include. So you did not have a chance to air this test or air the results of this test, or did you actually bring it up and did the judge say something about this psychologist who had done this test?
I have given the written of it to the court, but it was not the question to show that to the court because at the hearing, because the judge said, well, we don't know about this psychologist and she doesn't work for the court, so
So let's
we are not going to take that into account. And then she dismissed whatever I was
She
saying.
dismissed the entire
Yeah,
report from
yeah,
this clinical psychologist who had
yeah,
given you this particular test, the psychological evaluation, and had concluded that you were perfectly normal, not delusional, not violent, and in fact, gifted,
yeah,
right?
and not dangerous.
And not dangerous. Very, very important points. And all of this was kind of just swept away by this judge who said, oh no, take it away. We don't want to hear anything to the contrary of our prefabricated, predetermined conclusions.
Yeah, yeah. And then they made also a quote about my sister's testimony, because when I was at the emergency room in the psychiatrist ward of the public hospital in Voiron, I spoke with a psychiatrist during 30 minutes, and I explained her the details of the incident, and then I explained her the background of my life as a victim. And then she concluded that I was having a trauma, and I was thinking maybe she's talking about my experience as a victim. And no, she was saying I had one trauma 20 years ago, and this trauma made me think that I was victim of the secret services and of harassment, etc., because I wanted to escape from that trauma by inventing things that were not real. So
I think that's a favorite story with psychiatrists. Yeah, it's usually initiated by some kind of bereavement or death. So first there's a death or bereavement, and then there's the onset of targeting and neurosurveillance and neuroexperimentation, and then this is the formula, and then this is dismissed by the psychiatrist as being related to the to a trauma that's not been properly looked to, that's not been properly experienced and dismissed by the person themselves. So it's in whatever they call it. They probably have some language for it. Anyway, so it's unfortunate that that's what happened. So your sister basically was not giving any kind of testimony that you were mentally ill.
No, actually, in the same time I was in the emergency talking with the psychiatrist, the police in their station, they were interrogating my sister. They have asked her to come. So it was all planned in advance. I was talking with the psychiatrist, and just maybe 1 hour before, or even less, they were talking with my sister, and they were asking her what is about his obsession about the microwaves and about the harassment and the torture. What is that? And my sister said, well, it is so many years he's talking to me and to my mother about this. And since he's meeting psychiatrists since many years, for me, the explanation is that he's suffering from schizophrenia. And they were asking her, do you allow us to take him to the hospital because he needs maybe some cure? And she said, okay, I will not oppose myself to take him to the hospital. And then it was the trick. They have used her consent to have a member of the family to consent for me to have an internment in the mental hospital. And then just a few minutes after they got this from my sister, there is another doctor at the emergency who gave the order to send me to the mental hospital.
Okay, at this point you've been bumped off again, or you've frozen. I'm going to wait a few seconds.
Okay, I can hear you though. Okay, I don't know if I am online or not. I think it's dead. So we have to make another broadcast. I don't know if Ramola can come back. Maybe she can come back. Oh no, she has gone again. So we have to do maybe another part. I'm sorry. Oh no, she's back.
Okay, am I back? Oh, I can't believe what they are doing to us this evening. You know, clearly, Frédéric, what you are speaking about is earth shaking. So, you know, these people are kind of freaking out and, breaking into our conversation nonstop. So, but this conversation should be heard by everybody. All of this information about psychiatry and psychiatrists should be heard by everybody, because this is about fraudulent and wrongful psychiatry. And this is what I pointed out in my statement as well. Step by step, every single psychiatrist encounter that you have had appears to have been a fraudulent encounter, every single one of them. So that is information that everybody in the world should hear, that psychiatrists are engaging in fraud and in criminal activity, which is destroying people's lives. So let's go back to the story over here. So basically you said, in addition to the first psychiatrist, there was another psychiatrist at the next hospital, right? And this was...
No. It was the same hospital, because actually I have spoken 30 minutes with a doctor, and then the conclusion of everything was given into the hands of a second doctor in the same hospital. But this doctor, I never met him. It was his decision. And I think my guess is that they were waiting for my sister to give the consent. And when she gave the consent, there was another doctor behind the scenes who gave signed the order to send me to the mental hospital, and I've stayed there 2 months.
Right.
So in the court, in the hearing, they were quoting the testimony of my sister, and they were saying, your sister is stating in the testimony with the police that you are schizophrenic. So it is the proof. And then we know that you have met many psychiatrists during your life. So it's all connected. If you have seen many psychiatrists, if your sister says that you are schizophrenic, then it is the proof. And we have, moreover, the psychiatrist expert that is telling that you are. So there is no question to say against this.
But in actuality, what had transpired was that after the police handcuffed you and arrested you and held you in jail overnight, when you were taken to the emergency room at the first hospital, they contacted your sister, and what did they tell your sister? Did you find out really what they had actually told your sister? Did they say something like, your brother appears to be ill and needs medical treatment, and do you give your consent? Something like that.
It was all an entrapment from the beginning. So to my sister, they were only asking her point of view about why I am talking about the microwaves and the harassment and the torture.
Okay.
So she was not having any clue about the reality of this. She was only having my things I told to her and to my mother. So she doesn't know nothing about this, and she doesn't believe it is true. Okay. So the only thing she could say is, yes, he's talking about this. Yes, he's talking about this. Yes, he's talking about this. And it is his obsession. And he's visiting psychiatrists in the same time. Okay. So her conclusion, personal conclusion, is her intimate belief was that I was schizophrenic, and that's what she said to the police. And for the police,
that's her idea. Okay, so let's get down to it. So it was her idea because she couldn't make sense of what was happening, and so it's her idea that you might be mentally ill. So her idea is now being transported into the courtroom and being presented as, oh, you know, your family considers you lunatic, and therefore this is evidence that you are indeed lunatic. And here we have psychiatrists who've also given you a diagnosis. But what basis the psychiatrists have used to give you this diagnosis was actually never considered. Because when a psychiatrist gives a diagnosis, especially a diagnosis which involves the word schizophrenia or involves the word paranoia, they need to actually prove that there's some evidence of paranoia. There's some evidence of self-harm or possibility of harm to others, etc., right? Or persecutory delusions that could be problematic. So this is the language that they use, and we do not have any evidence here of that at all.
No, it's all based on the misunderstanding from the part of the psychiatrist of my story and as my testimony as a victim. So she doesn't believe I am a victim. So therefore whatever I say is delusional, and it is the proof I have a disease. That's all.
Right. So let's go back very briefly to part one of what happened in the courtroom, Frédéric, because you told me just now that you'd like to cover a couple things. What the alleged victim, Miss Stephanie Joseph, started to do.
So actually, it was after the two parts. Well, I don't remember if the part two was before or after that, but whatever. After that, they asked the so-called victim to come and to testify to the hearing. So she was answering a few questions, and then just after a few minutes, she was starting to cry. and she was starting to explain her life with a lot of miseries since 1 year and a half after the events.
I see.
And the prosecutor later concluded that I have seriously damaged the body and the psychology and the life of this lady, and for life. And she was crying, and I was asking to myself, but how she can cry on demand like that? And 1 year and a half after the events, how is this possible that she got a trauma like that?
Possibly because she's a good actor and she's a crisis actor or a surveillance role player who's been hired to act in this capacity?
I don't know.
So so people can cry on will, right? There are some people who can simply start tearing up and start crying. Or maybe she had a little piece of onion in her pocket, who knows? But there are people who actually do cry on demand. So, but this is extraordinary. So you have false accusations, no accident whatsoever, a judge who won't listen, and an alleged victim who shows up and starts weeping profusely.
Yeah.
It's really, like a soap opera.
And then it was almost the end, and the Dr. Catherine Horton was in Grenoble today, and she was there to appear as an expert witness, and she was not allowed to be inside the hearing during all the first part and the second part of the hearing, so she was out. And then it was the time for her to come and testify. So they asked her to come inside. And then there was also a man who was the translator, the official translator for her. Mm-hmm. And so she started to have some questions from the judge. And then I think the prosecutor didn't want to ask questions. And my lawyer asked her a few questions. And she just replied to questions because the judge at the beginning said, okay, we want to hear you because you are here, and only about the personality of Mr. Laroche. And we are not interested to hear about a forensic analysis of the events of the incident itself, because you are not allowed to talk about the facts of the incident themselves, because you were not a direct witness of them. So she was answering the question very well, and she said very good things about me, that everything I was telling was 100% correct, and she had the proof of it, scientifically proof. And she was starting to talk also about my implants that I measured with device, and about also the background of my life and my family, and that she was having some proof that I was really harassed by the secret services, and I was tortured, etc., etc. And the translator was not cooperative because he was asking her to repeat the sentence many times, and he made her lose some time. And he was also not able to understand how to translate certain words. So he was asking her to explain certain words, but they were basic words. So I don't know why he was doing like that. And then there were a few words of her sentences that he refused to translate. For example, the secret services, he did not translate those words. And the word implant, he did not translate those words. So it's only the Dr. Horton who remarked to him, please, can you translate those words also? And then he did. And so it was a word behavior. It was not cooperative. And then finally, after a few minutes, the Dr. Horton was talking about my implants and the proof I have, etc., etc. The judge said, okay, stop here, because we don't want to hear about all this in this court.
So that's a very important point. So it sounds like when she was speaking about implants and when she was speaking about the secret services, that's when the judge stepped forward and said, forget it, we are not going to permit this conversation in the court. Is that, what exactly did the judge say?
Yeah, the judge said, okay, stop now. We don't want to hear these things in this court. She didn't say you are not permitted or not allowed. It was the wish. It was the wish of the judge to not hear about this. And actually, the doctor
don't want to hear about it. Almost as if it's something that might hurt her ears. Interesting.
Yeah. But you have to understand that the Dr. Horton was invited by me. She was not invited by the court. So the problem, she was invited by me. So it was only on the will and the pleas of the judge that she would be heard or not. And it's only the judge who decides what she wants to hear from her and not. So because she's not officially invited by the court, it's my invitation, of course,
I
you know.
see. So Frederick, that's actually a huge point, and thank you for clarifying that. So basically, she was not invited by the court; she was invited by you, and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
judge. It's sort of her prerogative, is what you are saying, to choose to listen to somebody's testimony and witness or not. Now, I understand that Catherine's statement was submitted in the court, and my statement was also submitted in the court. But I just replayed the little bit of the earlier part one that we did, and you have stated over there that basically, and what you told me earlier as well, that basically the lawyer included the statement in his legal defense. And, he had spoken, as you know, extensively with me and suggesting that he was going to use my arguments for his legal defense. But ultimately, he did not bring it up in the court, and he did not present my name as well. He did not mention that an investigative reporter had provided an investigative reporter statement, right?
Yeah.
He didn't state that.
Actually, I can see this as a repetition of what I did with the psychologist. I have tried to bring the report of the psychologist who was saying I was mentally sane.
Right.
And they have dismissed this. And my lawyer didn't bring this report from the psychologist. It is me who did the effort to talk about it.
Right.
And in the same way, my lawyer did not mention your report neither. And your report has been done under my request. I have asked you to do this report because I was
Right.
thinking it could be a good thing to bring this report to the court. And I think my lawyer did submit it by written paper to the court, but he did not mention it at the hearing, and he did not mention your name. But it was also the case with the psychologist and many other things.
So this is yet another irregularity, and a kind of, it seems like a sabotage of your case, Frederick, where my statement, which was prepared with extensive conversation and reportage from you, and my statement, which also testifies to the whistleblowing and the testimony of other scientists, whistleblowers, who actually have the knowledge about these neuroexperimentation programs, speaking out. This testimony was actually not presented or permitted to be fully presented in the court by the lawyer. The lawyer sort of acted as a little bit of a gateway over there, and the gate was closed shut at that point. So that does make one wonder, to what extent are these people all in collusion with each other? That question is a very legitimate question. It's not a conspiratorial question. It's not a conspiracy theory kind of question. It's a very legitimate and a very valid question, because it appears that so much has been excluded from your defense, which is absolutely shocking. But, to other people who understand how corrupt the courts are and how it appears certain people own the courts, these issues will not be that surprising, I'm sure. I'm going to share screens at this point, and perhaps we can move to part two and talk about, what you had been talking about earlier, Frederick. Let's hope you're not bumped off again. Okay, so
Yeah.
here is my report, and I'm just briefly going to tell people, and I'm going to post this online. I'll PDF it and stick it online shortly. So, this is the first part is who I am,
Okay.
the work that I've done, the reportage I've done, who I've spoken to, how I obtained information from Frédéric, all of the interviews I've done with Frédéric, the articles I've written on his case, and my impression of him, which is like a character reference or a testimonial to his, sterling character. And he's certainly not a violent or delusory individual in the slightest. He's very truthful and straightforward, as everyone can see for themselves. Now, all I'm stating here is, okay, I'm going to present my analysis, and I go down. So part one of my statement is the entire incident, and I'm going down step by step based on Frédéric's reportage. And I'm going to see if I can move this along a little bit faster. So I'm just giving people a sort of a heads up as to what this was all about, and a little bit of analysis after I present the actual events associated with that incident. And talking about, how this person, Stephanie Joseph, is most definitely the one who volitionally jumped on the car and apparently slid off also in a self-propelled manner, or perhaps by gravity, who knows? But in any case, she jumped on by herself. And there's no proof that this was an accident. And how, Mr. Laroche was lawful throughout. Second part is law enforcement, and I advise that everybody read this section very carefully because it's all about the miscarriage of justice in relation to law enforcement and how law enforcement behaved, how the military police behaved, how the national police behaved. It sounds like the military police showed some intelligence, but the national police not so much. So that's what this section is about. And then the fact that there's no video surveillance, and then there was an involuntary psychiatric hold. Now, after that, part 3 is all about psychiatry. And again, I ask that people read this section very closely because every little step in it points to inexplicable steps taken by these psychiatrists who have supposedly examined and diagnosed Frédéric. So Frédéric was calm throughout, is what he tells me, but he was actually, and there is a whole story over here, Frédéric, that, we haven't really touched on over here, but we've touched on in previous podcasts about how you were pretty much poisoned by massive doses of this drug, risperidone, right?
Yeah. Yes.
To the point where you couldn't breathe, you were sort of in a comatose, paralyzed state, and nobody was around. Sorry?
For the full day.
For the full day, and there was no one around to witness your condition or to help. And
yes, there was some nurse during the day. They were here. I have even tried to speak with the nurse. And you know what? I noticed that when I was making the effort to communicate with someone, I was a little released of the pain. And then I told that to the nurse, that when I was talking to her, it was helping me to not feel so much the pain. And you know what she replied to me? She said, "Oh, so why don't you talk with the other patients? Why don't you to have a conversation with the other patients so that maybe you will not feel the pain?"
You're kidding me.
Yeah.
As if it's expected that you would feel pain from a drug? That's horrifying.
Yeah.
That's absolutely horrifying. Everything you have told me about your experience at the hospital is absolutely mind-blowing, absolutely horrifying. And I would think that anybody who's a true caregiver and, truly cares about people's health, works in hospitals, would be equally shocked. But it appears that in this case, nobody actually took care of you. And finally, it was a nurse who listened, right? When you said you need some help, you're being poisoned, and she gave you some kind of antidote. And you gave me the names of those, what was it?
Lepticure and Valium.
Lepticure and Valium, and I've put them in there. So that's very interesting. So, and then the doctor who came afterwards said he had to give you some drug anyway. He had to give you a drug, right? Yeah. So he took you off risperidone, but he put you on Abilify.
Yeah.
So you were still force medicated or force drugged in the hospital.
Yeah.
And then after that, you see the whole story of how those psychiatrists said you need to be committed, that you are in such a severely delusional state. This, calm person who's completely calm and who's just been poisoned now needs to be committed. So there you were. So all of this is spelled out, and there's so many wrongful aspects to this case, to your entire experience. So that's psychiatry. And then part 4, and I think this is the most important part, and this is what I wanted to show, and what I was hoping would be shown at the courtroom, because that's the whole point. I mean, that's the whole witness that I can give, I can testify that I've spoken to people. I can testify I've done the research. I can testify that I've spoken to reporting victims. And I can testify that from my own understanding of all of the research I've done, including the evidence of contracts that are being carried out involving field weapons testing. Scientists like Robert Duncan, who are speaking openly and witnessing to the existence or the fact that weapons testing in the field is being carried out with millimeter wave weapons, microwave weapons. These are electromagnetic weapons. So those are the things I can testify to, and that's what I did. So basically, I said, EMF, directed energy, and neurotechnologies do exist and are in use. And I think this information will be useful to anybody. And, I don't know about the court system because it appears courts are corrupt. But if people are doing court cases, this information will be useful to them. If people are ever in dire straits where they are in danger of being psychiatrically committed, this information will be very useful to them. So I recommend that people take this information and take this PDF and, take out this entire section. Perhaps what I will do eventually is just take out this section and post it separately as a PDF so people can use it. So, or, make it generic enough so everyone can use it. So, the basic info over here is about personal evidence and general evidence. And that's where I think perhaps you can address this a little further, Frédéric, because there are 3 parts of your personal evidence. One is the implants that you have found both on your own self and on your mother, I think.
Yeah.
The second is the whole story of Hewlett-Packard and how you discovered that there are people next door to you on your floor, next door to your team, were looking at a brain map, pretty much a brain map of your brain, and actually engaging in social engineering experiments on you. And then the story about India, when you were staying in Kashmir in somebody's house and a bunch of international students. And I initially thought those were Indian students, but these were international students. Actually confessed to you after you experienced a horrific night after they showed up, you overheard them, plus you actually experienced physical symptoms when they were next door. And then when you confronted them the next day, they confessed and said they had used weapons on you. Right. So go ahead and, if you want to touch on those 3 aspects.
Yeah, maybe we have talked about this in a previous report, but I can do it again. So I was working at the Hewlett-Packard office, and we were in an open space, and we were having a team of 10 technicians, and I was amongst them. And we were using 2 rows of desks for us, and there was a 3rd row of desk, and it was used by some other people, and we were a team of young technicians. We were 30 years old or something, and there was another row full of people much older. They were 40 or 50 years old, and they were speaking in French and in English. They were talking about things that I was knowing about, because it was things I have said or things I have done in private a few days or a few weeks or a few months before. And I was wondering to myself how they could know the details of my private life and how they could talk about it. So was it really me or not? Because they were not saying Frédéric, then they were instead using a code, the code name. They were using the name of Natalie. And after a few days of listening their conversation, I decided this Natalie does not exist. It is me, and this is a code name only. So at the end, I confronted to them, and I stood up, and I went to them, and I told them in front of witness, and I told them, gently, I told them, please stop what you are doing here in my office. You are not allowed to do that. I know you are here to survey me, and you are here to manipulate me and to torture me. And I know you are working for the Secret Service, the French Secret Service and the American Secret Service. So please stop and cease and desist immediately. And if you have people accusing me of anything, I want to be confronted to them to prove you wrong. And then the lady stared at me, and she said, how you managed to identify us? And I say, well, I am listening to you since many days and many weeks, and I can understand that you are here for me. And I can feel the torture I am feeling in the office. I know it's coming from your team. So she said, okay, so we are going to give you a reply if we can confront you to the people you are asking for. And I waited for the next day, and there was no reply. I waited one more day and there was no reply. So I understood that there will never be any reply. And the next the end at the end of this week, I was fired. So it was the
Oh, I
problem.
see. So they
Yeah,
got rid of you because you
yeah,
had
yeah,
figured it out.
yeah, yeah. And you know how I did this? It's because my colleagues were involved with them. They were working with them closely against me, and they were manipulating me, and they were asking me questions, and they wanted me um, to say that I was a sadistic person, because one of them already told me before that he was enjoying his life because he was a sadistic person, and he was then asking me to confess that I was a sadistic person too. And I was very shocked that someone insisted on me that I should confess such a thing. So they were all manipulating me, and the other person from the Secret Service, they were torturing me, and maybe they were having some devices hidden in the floor above of me. So I saw them watching a map, and this map was on their desk, and it was not a map of the planet Earth. It was, I saw, because I came closer
Right.
once they were
Mhm.
away from the table, and this was a map of my brain. I guess it's mine because it was a brain anyway. And there was a
Right.
lot of areas with colors and different colors. So they were trying to map out the different function and the different areas from my brain. And then later I heard them talking about my semiotics. And I was not knowing that word. I
Mhm.
just remembered that word, and 15 years later, I have read it in the book of the Dr. Duncan, and
Mhm.
he's explaining that the semiotics are the alphabets of the brain waves that are being used by the brain to function. So they were trying to make the language of my brain waves visible for them. So they were trying to study my semiotics. And I remember perfectly that word, that I was not aware of that word at that time. So all this proved to me that I was dealing with the person harassing me at my office. And so I came to see my boss, my manager, and I asked him, who are them? Who are they? And he said, well, I don't know who are they, and I advise you to ignore them and to not think about them anymore.
Mhm.
And the only thing I can tell you is that they have come to meet the big boss of Hewlett Packard, and they have asked him if they could rent this row of desk here, and they have paid by cash a lot of money. And so the boss of HP agreed to give them the desk for rent, but he was not knowing more. So at the end, I decided to wait the end of the day where nobody was there in the office, and I was searching in the drawer of the desk of my colleagues if there was any sign of who they were. And then I found a little post-it like that, and it was written the name and the phone numbers of everyone in this row. And then on the top of it, it was written Renseignements Généraux. And Renseignements Généraux is the official title of the French Secret Service at that time. So for me, there was no doubt about it. I was dealing with the French Secret Service, but they were speaking in English also with
And
English
you had
people.
said there were also some Americans mixed in with that group.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They were having Americans with them. So I was thinking it should be the FBI or the CIA, and they are training the French officers to use the weapons and the technology against me, and I was their guinea pig for the training.
Absolutely. And that's the kind of thing they've been doing everywhere. But it's kind of amazing. Your story is absolutely mind blowing because they did it in broad daylight in your case. You know, they were right
Yeah,
on
yeah,
your floor, they were right next to you, and they had a brain map. I mean, goodness,
yeah,
how much more overt and obvious could they get, right?
yeah, yeah. But after that, when they discovered that I have found out who they were, they never made the same mistake again. So they have never tried to be on the place of my work again, you know?
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So, you know, when we speak about brain maps, when we talk about people actually mapping brains or experimenting with people's brains to the extent of trying to map different areas of a person's brain to different cognitive abilities, processes, or actions, etc. We're talking about neuroexperimentation, basically, possibly with brain-computer interfaces, right? And that your second story, the story from India, suggests
Yeah.
also the existence of brain-computer interfaces, which
So
could just be a tiny little microchip, right? A little microcircuit that's implanted, or a
yeah.
neurostimulator that's implanted.
So you want me to talk about this?
Yeah,
So
please. Yeah, so that's your stories. Actually, these two are huge pieces of evidence because there's so much surrounding this. There's so much disclosure here on the existence of these targeting programs and on the very fact that you personally have been, the subject of this kind of targeting.
yeah. So I was living in the house of a friend, a lady, and her husband. And it was in the Kashmir in India because I have been to India during 4 years. And so I was living there a few months in Kashmir and I was living with them. And the lady is a Muslim and she's a very strong believer. And then I don't know how she managed, but she went near the airport. And at this time, there was a group of foreigners coming at the airport of Srinagar. And for me, it was already something awkward because the foreigners, when they come to India, they come to Mumbai or New Delhi. And then sometimes some of them go to Ladakh and to the airport of Leh. But they never stop in the between, I mean, in Srinagar and Kashmir, because of the militancy and the terrorists
Right.
that
There's a
are
lot of
supposed to be here.
border wars between
So
Pakistan that constantly go on.
I
Yeah.
cannot see your image.
Oh, I'm right here.
Your
Can you
image
hear
is
me?
not moving.
Can you hear me? Image is not moving. Okay, let me send you a Skype message. But you can't hear me. All right, now you have frozen. Oh dear. All right. Frédéric, are you still here?
Oh,
okay. Now I see you.
Okay.
I don't know which one of us was bumped off, but weird things are happening, right? I stopped sharing my screen and came back. So I'm glad we're back.
Okay.
Go ahead and finish the story.
So it was already awkward that a group of foreigners arrived in Kashmir. It's not possible. And mostly that it was a group of Christian. They were coming from the church and they were young people. They were 25 and they were maybe
they were speaking English, but you don't know if they were American or British or what. Do you know?
I don't remember. But I didn't talk with them much, and they were the guests. They were the guests of the lady who was offering me the hospitality. So
right,
they were not my friends. So the lady saw them at the airport and they were asking her, do you know a place where we could stay because we don't know where to stay tonight? And she said, okay, you can come to my home because I have the room of my son. He's in the US and it's empty, so you can use, and the four of you. So I think there was 2 boys and 2 girls. I don't remember. So they were using the bedroom for them. So they came in the evening, and then we had the dinner, and then finally we went to the bed. And this night they were in the room next to mine. Okay. And this night I have suffered from torture. So I was having a lot of pain, and the pain are basically 10% of the pains are targeted to my brain, and 90% of the pains are targeted to my body and to my lower abdomen. So I was feeling this during this night where they were present in the room next to mine. And in the same time, I could hear them talking during the whole night because they were not sleeping and they were having the light on. So I was trying to sleep, but it was impossible. And I was listening to them. And when I was having a lot of pain and I was not able to control that pain, they were laughing. And when I was resisting to the pain at other moments, I was stronger and I was able to defeat them. So they were shouting. And it has repeated like that many times. So I was under pain, or I was able to control the pain, and they were laughing and they were shouting, or it was almost the same repeatedly a few times. And it was synchronized. So I could,
Absolutely. You felt a synchronization or a correlation between what you were experiencing and doing and how they were responding. So every time they weren't able to actually physically hit you because you had evaded it in some way, they started to laugh and shout and increase their noise level, which is sort of what a lot of people who are other targets also experience and report, that, the noise harassment goes up around them when they're not personally being hit, when through some means they're being shielded or whatever.
yes. And they were also saying a few sentences, and I could hear the words. And they were talking about my facility of speaking English, and that part of my brain was English built. It was built in English in my brain. And also, I was able to have another part of my brain speaking in Spanish. And when I heard about this, I said, what are they talking about? So actually, they were trying to map out the functioning of my brain. And I think they were seeing on their screen in real time the activities of my brain. And maybe they were using a brain to computer interface with that. So they were able to see my brain. They were able to make some comments about it. I was able to hear them say, and they were torturing me in the same time. And I was listening to their reaction to my reaction, and it was synchronized. And at one point of time, I was concentrated in my thought in English, and they were asking themselves, "Oh, wait a minute, where has gone the Spanish part?" And I was thinking to myself, why are they concerned about the way of my brain being able to speak in Spanish, because I am not thinking in Spanish right now, I'm thinking in English. So I was again thinking they are trying to analyze in lifetime the functioning of my brain, and my Spanish part was not functioning that time, so they were wondering where it is. It was
Right.
for me the explanation.
They're mapping everything in real time. And, I just wanted to throw in, this is something that I need to explore a little bit further and need to investigate and research a bit further. But it's not necessarily an issue of BCI interfaces, although it could be. It could also be some other means of, brain reading, which could be electro-optical imaging or some other kind of imaging or reading from a distance remotely. There's so many technologies, it looks like these days. And there's also so many hidden technologies that we don't know about. So through some means, it appears that the functions of your brain were a concern to them, that they actually had access to knowledge of the functions of your brain in terms of mapping. They could see it almost on a map. So that's extraordinary in itself, because that's evidence, isn't it, that this kind of neuroexperimentation is indeed going on. The entire experience that you have just detailed, and then there's another part of the story, right? So
Yeah.
go
So
ahead.
it was the end of the night and it was the morning, and I think they were sleeping. So I was having a rest in the morning. And then it was the time for the breakfast. So we went down to have the breakfast. And the lady, the landlord, she was asking us to make a prayer before having the food. And she was asking, who wants to make the prayer? And I said, I. And there was a plan in my head. I was having a plan. I was thinking I will use this prayer to turn it as a prayer so that the landlord lady would not pay attention to what I say exactly. She would think it is a prayer, but it is not a prayer. It was, an inquisition to these people, to this student. I wanted to make them understand that I was knowing what they were doing here and who they were. So I started to make some comments about what just happened in the night, about what I heard them say and what I heard them do and what I was feeling at that time. It was a kind of prayer because I was using the word of God, the word of soul, the word of believing. I was using some few words mixed with my comments about what happened with them and me during the night.
Yeah,
So,
very interesting.
so the lady was thinking it's a prayer and she was saying Amen. And the students, they were immediately understanding that I was talking about what they did tonight, the last night. So at the end of the prayer, I think we didn't have the time to have the breakfast finally, because they stood up immediately and they went to a corner of the room and they were talking with each other. And then
I wanted to just interject for a minute, Frédéric, because you gave an example earlier that was kind of interesting. I think one of the things that you said, because basically you were placing covert communications just as
yeah,
in their paths, right? And
yeah,
one of the things you said was, why do people have to worry about the Spanish-speaking portions of anybody's brains or something like that?
yeah, that's correct. I mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So in any case, so they were, they heard all this, and then they were actually, it appears that this particular group had some conscience, had some morals, had some scruples, because they whispered amongst themselves, and then they came back to you and they said things to you,
Yeah.
right? What
There
did they
was
say?
one boy, he came to me and he said, Frédéric, we want to say we are sorry for, he was whispering, we want to say we are sorry about what we did. We did to you something, and we have used some devices on you, but we were having orders. We could not do differently. And if you want any help, I can give you my mobile number. You can call me at any time. And he gave me his mobile, but I lost it. Otherwise,
Oh, dear.
I should have used it and called
Darn.
him and asked him more questions. But
Yes, I was going to say, you need to have sent this boy a whole list of questions. What kind of
yeah.
devices? Who's
And then
ordered?
after a few minutes, they have left the home and they were no more wanting to stay here because I have uncovered them.
They left in a few hours, and this is significant because they had showed up and it appeared as if they were going to be staying for a longer period of time. But as soon as you had this conversation, they pretty
Yeah.
much left almost
Nah,
immediately.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's, highly telling. So that's part of what I had set up in my analysis, as well as part of the personal evidence that you have personally gleaned related to neuroexperimentation projects being carried out on you. And then there's this whole section 38, which is on whistleblowers, documents, reports, articles on EMF neurobiotechnologies. And, I've just put in a whole bunch of quotes that have been published before in earlier articles, in letters that people like Barbara Hartwell, CIA whistleblower, has written for me, letters from Karen Stewart. This particular quote from Dr. Rauni Kilda is from a YouTube video that another great researcher in our midst found for me recently. And so basically she's saying, the Secret Services are always ahead in terms of technology. And so she's testifying to the use and existence of these technologies. The Polish Minister of Defense, in I think it was March or April 2016, he responded to somebody's question saying, yes, we do know that people are complaining about microwave weapon attacks. We're trying to find out more. Karen Stewart's letter testifying to the fact that these experimentations do indeed exist. Gerald Sosby's testimony saying that the FBI is using deep space-based technology, biochemical viral warfare elements and agents, psychological warfare to destroy people. Robert Duncan talks about the military applications, the use of cybernetics and how he was involved, and how field weapons testing is going on. James Giordano, this is a military neuroscientist. Now, this is one of the guys on the other side of the fence here. He's in the covert ops, and he's given a few talks. He started to, this stuff is slowly coming out. So there is some public domain info out there. He's got 2 videos out there, and this is from the second video, From the Bench to the Battlefield or something is what it's called. A talk he gave at Lawrence Livermore Labs last year. So over here, this is a very important quote. So I suggest that everybody read it. And he's basically saying, yes, we are targeting the brain. We're tracking neurological or brain signatures of key targeted individuals that are thought to represent whole groups. They're using neuropharmacologics. Sounds like drugs. I don't know what neurodrugs are, so that's something I'll have to look up.
Yeah, I think I know.
Do you think you know? Okay.
Yeah, there is a professor. He was making experiments on artificial Valium and artificial LSD, and it's brain wave patterns representing the brain waves of the brain when it is subjected to a specific drug. So wow. when the brain is subjected to Valium or to LSD, there is a brain wave patterns forming, and he has captured this pattern. And when he sends back this same pattern to a person without giving the drug, then the person is behaving with his brain as if she was having the drug absorbed.
This is incredible. So basically, it's just a brainwave pattern that correlates to the effects of a drug on a
Yeah,
brain. And that cloning or heterodyning into somebody's brain is going to essentially frame that person as being a drug addict or being, or a user of that particular drug. So these are weapons. These are weapons. And I'm sure some of this is being developed under the guise of benevolent purposes, etc. But it sounds like they have weaponizable aspects to them. And that, I think, is what he's talking about, because he's talking about weapons. We're talking about a military neuroscientist over here. I can utilize neuropharmacologics and various forms of brain stimulation to extract information from key intelligence targets. So basically, if he wants to send a truth serum, he doesn't need to make you imbibe
no,
it. He can just
yeah,
remotely
yeah,
beam it into your brain.
that's correct.
Oh, incredible. So, and then look at this stuff. Tight and tiered integrated tracking and access networks utilizes biologically implantable chips to track key individuals. We know all about that. And provide information about the way brains work to create narratives and behaviors. So basically, they are doing, BCI tech on you. In Europe, the Nutfield Council of Bioethics said we are getting very close to weaponizing the brain sciences, and in a year it would be ready for use. I think he said this in 2017. In 2014, the NAS, that's the National Academy of Sciences, reconvened and made the announcement that the brain sciences are now ready and are currently being used in such endeavors in the US and worldwide. So we're moving into the operational space. I think they moved into the operational space decades ago. And this last part is really, really interesting and important. High output sensory stimulators can be administered by UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, or insect-borne, or by large vehicles, cars, or tanks. So those who are targeted are not dreaming when they report. They're not having delusions when they report that it appears FedEx trucks, USPS vans, UPS trucks and vans, recycling trucks, trash trucks are being used in their vicinity in ways that are detrimental to them. It appears that they're getting pulse shots in their head, or they're feeling as if the parts of their brain are being stimulated, etc. This is what James Giordano is confessing to. These use sensory mobilizing agents that use high electromagnetic pulse energy that may also use high levels of sound and light energy, and they disrupt neurosensory functions. These are being used. So remember, this is a military neuroscientist, head of the European Union Human Brain Project. So this testimony, I think, is very important. And then there's a whole bunch of other affidavits, articles, videos. This is a sampling. I just put a list over here of a select few that I think are important. Bioethics have selected non-lethal weapons from the DoD, couple documents from the US Air Force Research Lab about biological effects of directed energy, the USAF Radio Frequency Radiodosimetry Handbook, and a few articles testifying to less than lethal and directed energy weapons, because that's what local law enforcement is using. They're using weapons that they are calling less than lethal, non-lethal, dual-use technologies or crowd control technologies. So, and there's a report from the Geneva Academy for International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, something I'll talk about later more extensively, the non-kinetic energy weapons termed non-lethal. And then Dr. Reinhard Munzert's article targeting the human with directed energy weapons. My own article on David Voigt's trek across America, I think a year ago or a couple of years ago. Former US Navy officer walks across America to expose covert targeting and neuroexperimentation program. And then a little bit of information again that was provided to me because we did this in very short time, Frédéric, for you. And this person who's, I'm not sure she wishes her name to be known, but I will publish her name later if she's okay with it, helped me a great deal with the research and offered these bits of research over here. The Europe Non-Lethal Weapons Market, 2018 to 2023 from Mortar Intelligence, Global Directed Energy Weapons Technologies and Market Forecast 2025. And then I focused a little bit on implants, and I've posted a few articles, documents on implants, the ethical aspects of ICT implants in the human body, from the European Group on Ethics and Science and New Technologies to the European Commission. And then this paper by a young research fellow from a college in the UK, St. Mary's University College, ICT implants, nanotechnology, and some reasons for caution. And of course, the very famous paper by Dr. Rauni-Leena Lukanen-Kilde, former chief medical officer of Finland, on microchip implants, mind control, and cybernetics. And she traces the history from the time of origin right up to the present day. And then this wonderful little, I think this is like a 6-minute video, Secret Psychotronic Operations, Dr. Rauni-Kilde. This is the one from which I quoted earlier. And this other video, this has a mix of testimony from Robert Duncan, and actually it's a little excerpt from the Jesse Ventura Brain Invaders conspiracy video that I think everybody knows about, and a little more from Robert Duncan's interview with Tyrone Dew, and where he talks about the voice of God weapons, synthetic telepathy, and cybernetic hive minds. And finally, I posted, because this is very important, the military did define voice to skull and then removed this definition from online. And this was mocked by various journalists. So this particular article at thelivingmoon.com, Sonic Projectors, Voice to Skull Weapons, shows a lot of technologies that can put voices into people's heads, and also displays that little bit, a little screenshot, I think, which was taken by a few people and is still online, of the Army voice to skull definition. And, finally, so that's all of the evidence that I had over there. And I finally come back to my conclusions. And I think one of the main things I wanted to present at your court, and it's too bad this document was not ultimately presented, but I'm glad it's in the record. It's in the public record now. Was basically, from everything that you have reported, there is no way anybody could call you delusional, because there is ample proof, there is ample evidence that these technologies exist today. These technologies are being tested today, and they're also in operation today. So in other words, nobody who presents or mentions implants, or mentions electromagnetic weapons, or mentions microwave weapons, should be carted off to a psych ward. Psychiatrists need to be educated. They need to get informed, and they need to get educated. So everything that's been done to you has been fraudulent and false. They've used faulty duty of care doctrines. They've used faulty adhesion of care doctrines to both force medicate you at the outset and then to continue that. And it appears that they're still doing that now. So the very last part of my statement is the summary of my conclusions in the close, and I have the summary all spelled out. I won't go all over that, but this is the point that I wanted to make. It's a number 11, and this is the most important point, I think, that I can make as a reporter. While basically I preface this point by stating that everything you are reporting is plausible based on the understanding of modern investigative journalism. And this is the point, I think, that every court and every psychiatrist needs to hear today. While it may be beyond the scope of the court to fully explore and address this subject of today's non-consensual covert neuroexperimentation, no court or psychiatrist in modern times can state that mention of EMF neurotechnologies or radio frequency identifying or detection implants, or reporting non-consensual experimentation or directed energy weapons field testing is a sign of paranoid delusion, which must be met with toxic forced medication. That would simply be untrue. And that is the fact, that is the primary fact that needs to be established for every living human being on the planet today, including everybody who is an official working for any kind of authority in the court system, in law enforcement, in the judicial system, in the legislative system, in Congress, anywhere in governments, or in hospitals as doctors or psychiatrists. It is untrue to call, it is not correct. It is extremely faulty and fraudulent to call a person delusional if they mention implants or if they mention microwave weapons or any other kind of EMF weapons or neuroweapons, because all of these weapons and all of these technologies exist and are being used non-consensually on people. So when people come forward, their reporting witness must be respected and honored. And that's kind of how I concluded, that you've actually been victimized. And I've talked a little bit about the history of your victimization, which you've spelled out in your timeline. And that's a whole story in itself, Frédéric, your family story. I don't know if we touched on that extensively in our podcast, but I would love to, sit down with you sometime and explore all of that as well and bring that up. So, and then I state it's true and I close, and that's pretty much my statement. So I am going to, at this point, stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to come right back.
Yeah, and about my family background, I just tried to make a remark at the end of my evocation of the facts. I was trying to tell the background of me and my family, and I made the remark my father was a war prisoner, a Nazi experiment. Yeah, the Nazi experimented on him, and my mother now is having a cancer, and this is probably caused by dew. And my half brother, who was 25 years older than me, from a first marriage of my father, he was probably chipped also, and he was sometimes hearing the voice of God talking to him in the night, and he was thinking God told him to say something or to do something with his life. And you know what? At the end,
V2K, voice to skull
yeah,
technology. Yeah.
it's possible that it was a technology and not a
Right.
disease. So when I mentioned just for a few seconds this, they did not pay really attention to what I said because they stopped me. And then later, that's funny, the lawyer of the so-called victim has used the few words I was trying to explain, and she has used this against me. And she said, well, just a few minutes ago, Mr. Laroche just confirmed that he was listening to voices. And I was not talking about me, but my half brother. And I was thinking they didn't want to hear anything of this. And
No.
finally she has heard this, and she has mistaken this as a part of my life and not the life of my half brother. So it was very disconcerting, all
Oh,
this.
it's frightful hearing these stories. It sounds like everybody in that courtroom was kind of stacked against you and was, ready to condemn you at a moment's notice. And sort of, they were not interested in the truth. They were not
No.
interested in the airing of the truth or in hearing the truth or in understanding the truth of what really has happened. So it's almost like a kangaroo court over here. So very, very distressing all around, Frédéric, as to what has transpired, what's gone down. Tell us what is next. Are you going to appeal? What's going to happen? What's the possibility here of making an appeal and so forth?
Yes, if if they cancel of the charge against me, then it's okay, because this is the only thing I'm asking. I am not asking money compensation. I'm not asking money compensation, but I am in the right to ask such a thing. But it is not the case. So I just hope that they will dismiss the whole case against me. But if they are accusing me of anything, and in the list of the sentence of the prosecutor, if they pick up just one thing, I am dead. If they pick up the jail sentence, I am dead. If they pick up the fine sentence, I am dead. If they pick up the forced medication, I am
Oh
dead.
God,
And
yeah.
if they sentence me to many sentence, I am more than dead. So of course I will make an appeal.
Excellent. Well, I'm really glad to hear your fighting spirit because that's what we need. What's happening over here is that so many of us the world over are being attacked, are being suppressed, repressed by the secret services. You're in France, it's the French secret services. Over here in the United States, it's the US secret services or the intelligence agencies or the intelligence community, as they fondly call themselves. So, they have no right to be running roughshod over people like this, over destroying people's lives. So it's very important to make a protest. It's very important to publish the truth. And it's very important to keep speaking and keep publishing the truth, So not just once, but several times, because I think what they are hoping is that they can crush everybody one by one by one, call every single person who's a reporting victim of these crimes delusional, and take them out of action, or entrap them in this fashion. And it's dreadful what's been done to you. It's absolutely horrifying. So I have a feeling that there is huge support for you and for your case, and that people will rally around you. And what you really possibly need is a lot of media coverage, a lot of publicity. Put your whole story out there, speak to as many people as you can, and make sure everybody knows what's going on, so that the whole world is informed. It appears that there is a coterie over here in the world, a Secret Service coterie that's using secrecy as a kind of weapon against us, against humanity. And we're on the other side, and we are being attacked. And our defense, our only defense right now that we have, is speaking out. So, more and more speaking out is all is that I can see at this point. So I thank you so much for coming forward. Is there anything further that you would like to cover before we close today?
Yeah, actually, my conclusion is that they just want to destroy me, and they want to silence me and to stop me right now in my activism. And they don't want me to talk about this subject publicly anymore, because they don't want to have negative publicity, and they don't want to have this political problem and this hot potatoes in their hands. So they just want to destroy me. And that's why I'm hoping that this broadcast, and if I can make some publicity about it, then the people around me will start talking about it, and maybe it will prevent them to do just that.
Yes, absolutely. I'm with you 100%. And I'm so glad you brought up this because, we didn't really touch on this. You are an activist. You are a tremendous activist for those who are targeted. And you have done a whole bunch of things. I mean, on the one hand, you've got stickers on your car to speak out, by itself as you're driving along. You've also written a lot of, you've photocopied letters and sent it to Parliament, right? And sent it to governments. Is it mainly inside France you did your activism, and you've also passed out flyers at various points?
Yeah, in France, in Grenoble, and maybe once in Paris.
Once in Paris. I remember you spoke to me about that.
And I went also to the conference Covert Harassment in Berlin in October 2015.
October 2015. So you have a video online speaking
Yeah.
there, right? Yeah, so all of this is very important to understand. So these are highly political and politicized subjects. Basically, they are revealing the dark and dirty work of the intelligence agencies and secret services, who are happily and non-consensually and amorally and immorally experimenting on people worldwide. Brain experimentation, AI experimentation, cybernetics experimentation, biosensor experimentation, telemetry experimentation, all sorts of things, as well as social engineering, narrative disruption, psychological experimentation, whatever. So a whole bunch of very dark experimentation is going on. Frédéric has been an activist and a whistleblower, and now he has become, the subject of a kind of crush agenda coming straight from the dark services and forces. So the truth has to be known, and the truth should be published, and the truth will be known, Frédéric, never fear. So, on that note, I think we should end on a note of hope that, what do you personally feel? Do you feel you're going to give up activism just because something like this has happened to you?
Well, I would like to think to care of myself better, and to not be troubled anymore with this kind of things. So I will not stop talking about these things, but maybe I will try to be more cautious and more careful about not exposing me to such entrapments and such problems. So I will just try to be a little more careful about what I do and what I say. But I don't think I will stop telling the truth. And I want to thank you, Ramola, for exposing this. And I want to thank also the 10 persons who were here, and they were coming from Grenoble and from Paris and also from Switzerland, and they were here to support me and to be the witness of the hearing. So I want to thank them, and I hope from this broadcast I will broaden the view to many other people, because it has to be broadened to a more bigger audience.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad there were people to support you over there. And you say friends and supporters came from different parts of France as well. So
yeah,
that's wonderful to hear. And, this is all we can do. We can support each other and we can tell the truth. The truth is our weapon.
yeah.
they do not have that weapon, because the only weapon they have are real weapons, which are actually harming people. So the only weapon we have are words and the truth. And no one can stop us from using those weapons.
Yes.
And ultimately, my hope is that they will prevail, because, you know, they are stronger. The truth will prevail. The truth will last.
Okay.
All right. So thank you so much, Frédéric. I'll thank everybody for joining us tonight. And stay tuned for, you know, further updates on Frédéric's case. We wish you all the very best, Frédéric, as you go forward. And, you know, I hope the appeal comes through to your advantage.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.